My name is Kevin Synder, here for Tuts Plus. Let's jump in and take a look at the project that we'll be making today. Okay, so we're going to be going for this 3D stroke look here, and we are going to utilize in this project After Effects. That's where we're going to start, and then we're going to jump over to Cinema 4D to go ahead and actually get this in 3D space, and then we're going to jump back over into After Effects to add even more paint textures to this to really sell that 3D look. So this is an exciting workflow. Hopefully it'll help you kind of see how you can use After Effects and Cinema 4D together in some different ways. So let's jump right in and get started. Okay, here in After Effects, let's jump right in and get started. We're going to create our first comp, Control N. It's going to be 6,000 pixels wide and 600 pixels tall. We're going to use 24 frames per second, and we're going to go for a duration of 20 seconds. Okay. Let's create a layer, Control Y. Let's call this Paint Stroke. Make sure it's the same size as our comp. Say OK. We're going to grab the pen tool, and we're going to draw a line on here, and we won't draw it perfectly straight. We'll draw it just a little crooked in here, but we want it to be fairly straight. But this is a paint stroke, so we want it to be, just a little bit off here. Okay, that works. Let's go ahead and add the stroke effect. And we need to crank up the brush size on this. Okay, this is going to be our base for our paint stroke here. We just want to make sure on the edge that it doesn't get clipped anywhere, and we want to go right to the end though. Okay, that looks good. We want to make sure that this is on transparent. Okay, so that the background is transparent now. Let's roughen this up with roughen edges. And let's crank the border up. Okay, and maybe the scale a little bit. Looks good. And you can change the sharpness if you want. We can bring that down maybe just a little bit. Okay, so if we come in here, this is going to be kind of the edge of our paint stroke a little bit. But we want this to look a little bit more like paint. Okay, and we're going to do that with some stock footage. Let's take a look. Here in Bridge, I have the Paint It Back collection from danstevers.com. So go there and check it out. So if I go into transparent, we have this wonderful texture called Gritty Bars Alternative. So we have 3 strokes here that work out really well. We just want this top one. So let's go ahead and open that in Photoshop. In Photoshop, we're just going to crop this down so that we just have the top one. Let's commit that, and we will save it. So images, I already have it saved, so I'll just click cancel. Let's go back over to After Effects, and let's create a new folder. Let's call this Images, and let's bring in our gritty bars, and we're going to drop this down on top of paint stroke. Now it's a little bit tough to see. To make it easier, let's go to Fill, double click that, we'll make it red. Let's go ahead and scale this down so that it's about the same height as our base stroke here. Doesn't have to be exact. We're going to work with that in a second. Okay, that works out pretty good. I think I'm going to go ahead and lengthen this just a little bit, something like that. And let's bring it all the way down to the end. And I'm going to rotate it just a little bit. And let's bring it down. Okay, so I'm going to press Control D to duplicate this, and we're just going to stagger this down the line here. I'm looking at where they come together right here to make sure we have a pretty good looking seam. So we just keep pressing Control D, and we're just going to keep bringing it down. So we can make this a little faster. We can select these three and press Control D and bring them down. So this one I don't think we'll need. This one I want to rotate just a little bit. Select W on the keyboard. We can rotate it. And I'm just going to go ahead and cheat a little bit here and stretch it out. Okay. I'm going to select all my layers. And I'm going to go to Edit, or I'm sorry, Effect, and remove all. And let's go ahead and pre-compose these gritty bar layers. So Control Shift C, and I'm going to call this Paint Overlay. Say OK. Now I'm going to go ahead and reapply the fill effect to this comp. So double click it, and I actually want it to be white. We will colorize it in Cinema 4D. And now we're going to use this paint stroke layer as a mask. So let's bring this above our paint overlay and change the track matte to alpha. And now we get this layer that looks, you know, like kind of a roughed in paint stroke along our comp. So it's looking pretty good. The next thing we need to do is make this look more organic with some paint splatters. Okay, so let's jump back to our project and let's bring in some paint splatter textures. So for the paint splatters, I'm using the Riot Gear FX from Video Copilot, and these work out pretty good. I know there's a lot of stock video footage and images out there of paint splatter. Feel free to mix it up and kind of make it your own. Here I am using the actual still images. I tried it with the animated ones, but it just kind of looked funny because putting these in 3D space, it didn't really work out that well. But feel free to experiment. I'm just going to go ahead and actually grab all these. Let's just bring all those into After Effects. So let's go to Images. And as what we're going to do is, you can kind of see a pattern where these textures intersect. We want to overlay these splatter images to hide those seams, and then we're going to put splatter images in between as well, just to make this look as organic as possible. This part can be a little bit time consuming, just kind of tweaking things to get it right. I'm going to go through it just fairly quick so that you don't have to watch me do this a whole lot here. Okay, so we're just going to look through, and you know, some of these splatters work out better than others. The ones that I like for these seams are the ones with a more defined splatter, kind of like that. So let's bring that in and slide it over. Now we can't see through the black right now, and we want to make sure we have an alpha channel on this when we export it. So I'm going to go to Effect, Null, and Unmult. So unmultiply. You can get this free effect from Red Giant. Comes in handy. I use it a fair amount. So let's just bring it in here, rotate them around, scale them, and I'm going to try and hide these seams in here. Okay, and all I'm going to do now over here is I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it, and we'll jump back over to our textures. And now once I find one I like, I can just hold down Alt and drag on top of the duplicate, and it brings it right in. The effect's all ready to go. So let's rotate this, and this looks pretty good. I like this because we want to fill in some of these areas here. Maybe scale it down a little bit. Okay, let's duplicate it. Find another one. Bring it in. I'm going to rotate it. So W on the keyboard for rotate. Let's maybe scale it up. And I like them when they kind of work with other textures. And let's get kind of a splattery, more of a splatter right there. I guess they're all splatters, but something a little bit more spread out. Yeah, let's try that one. So as you can see here, this is just kind of personal preference. You just have to play around with it and until you get something you like. If I can grab this one. Okay, so as you can see, we're going to use a lot of layers here. I found that the more layers you use, the better it looks. Okay, so it's kind of going for this painted streak / paint dripped look. And some of these aren't bad, like this one here, for kind of filling in some of these spots. I know it doesn't look like it adds a whole lot, but if you add enough of these over time, they do add up. You just got to be careful that you don't clip off too much of the splatters on the edges. Let's try and get one that's a little more spread out. That looks good. Okay, so we'll just keep making our way down here. And I'm not being too picky here about the textures. I'm just trying to get this kind of done so we can move on to the next part. Okay, that one's pretty big. Let's maybe put it in here. Okay, but these splatters do a great job of kind of concealing where we connected our paint textures. So the nice thing is once we get this done once, we won't have to do it again because we got a couple of tricks where we're gonna reuse this layout to where we can mix it up, and we don't have to do this a bunch of times. And you could if you wanted to make a bunch of different versions of this by hand, you could, but for the sake of time, we are going to try and reuse as much stuff as possible. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. This is kind of a good end piece here. Okay, let's do one more. Okay, so sometimes I just like to hit S and scale it up here because there's so many layers in there. Sometimes it gets a little confusing which one's which. All right, let's pull out here. And so as you can see now, we have this kind of grungy splatter line, and we could go in and probably add more textures. It looks like we could use some more here and here, but for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and call this good. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in here. Let's do Control A and twirl all these up. We're going to come down to our paint stroke, and we want to animate this on going from left to right. So let's go to the effects controls, and yeah, we want to animate the end here. So let's go set a keyframe at ×0 for 0 on the end, and let's do plus on the keyboard to zoom in, and let's go right here at about, let's do 1.5 seconds right there. So let's make this 100. Right, so over time this thing comes on. Now obviously we have a small problem. We need this paint splatter to come on with the stroke. So we want these things to animate on. Now we kind of have a mess a little bit because these layers are not in any particular order. We kind of started from our left to right, so you would think that the bottom one is the furthest left, and then moving to the right it moves upwards, but we kind of moved them around as we went, and I didn't want to be constrained to, I don't want to worry about the stacking order as we did this design. Okay, so we're going to use a free script. It's actually a pay what you want script, so I really encourage you to, if you like it and you use it, I really encourage you to pay it. This is from AE Scripts, and it's called Sortie. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and select all of our splatter images, and using Sortie here, we want it to be on descending works, and we want it to be based off of position. Okay, and it's going to be based on position on the X value, so that we're going to sort these things depending on where they are left to right in our comp here. So let's go ahead and hit play, and it's sorted already. So if we come back down to our image, we have the top layer is the most left, and if we work our way down the comp here, we have all of our images going from left to right, top to bottom down here. So it makes it really nice. We're going to use a script to roughly place these layers in position to match our line coming on. So I'm going to select the top layer, scroll down to the bottom of the splatter, the last splatter images, select it, and we're going to use a script called PT Shift Layers. So I'm going to double click that, and I want to shift selected layers or stagger selected layers. I want to stagger them, okay, from the current time indicator, and I want to stagger them, let's say 2 frames. Now it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to get it kind of close. Let's click apply, and so as you can see, this does just what it says. It's staggered them. Each one is 2 frames apart. So as we scroll through here, these images are going to come on with our line coming through. Now obviously this first one is already on here. We don't want that. So we already need to move all of our layers to the right. Let's move them 2 frames. So we'll hold down Alt and page down. and that's going to move all the layers because we don't want anything showing to start with here. And now we're just going to go through and check the timing of this as it plays through. And this can be just a little tedious here. So right here, so that looks like it's timed pretty well. We just want to make sure that, like right here, this image popping on kind of comes on after this. I want it a little bit closer, so I'm going to select that layer, Alt page up, so it comes on a frame earlier. So let's check the timing of that. Okay, looks good. And the layer right behind it is a little bit slow too. So it seems like all these are going to be a little slow. So I'm going to select them all and do Alt page up. And maybe one more time. So let's just page down. So that one actually seems a little slow to me. So let's go Alt page up to move it one frame. Still page down to step through this. So that one seems a little bit slow to me. So I'm going to do Control arrow down to get down to the layer I want. Alt page up to move it one frame in time. Let's go page down. Okay, so that one's slow as well. So Control arrow down, Alt page up. Yeah. So let's move this over. Page down, page down. So we have another big gap here. So I'm going to select all these layers, Alt page up. Just kind of get them lined up here. Okay, so that one is way too soon. Let's go Alt page down. Page down. Okay, it's still a little too soon. Okay, that one's way too soon. So getting this timing down can be just a little bit tedious. Let's go ahead and move all these just a little bit. So unfortunately, it's a little bit of playing around with these things. Should have done the math and made the exact right number of layers, and this would be a lot easier. Okay, so I'm just hitting page down to advance through frames. That looks pretty good. And then Control arrow down to select the next layer down, and Alt up changes it one frame sooner, Alt page down one frame later. Okay, we made it to the end. So let's bring this in so we can see the whole thing, or the best that we can. And let's just do a little RAM preview to see what this looks like. Okay, so there's our first animated stroke coming on. It looks a lot better animated, obviously. Once we put this in 3D space, it really brings it to life. Okay, let's jump over to the project panel here. Let's go ahead and name our comp. Let's name this 3D Paint 01. Now let's create a very large comp to kind of lengthen this out a bit. It's fairly large now, but once we get over into Cinema 4D, we're going to kind of run out of texture here. So let's make a new comp, Control N. Let's name this 3D Paint 01, or let's call this 3D Paint Final 01. And we're going to make it 18,000 pixels by 600, 24 frames per second, and for 30 seconds. Now in our 3D Paint Final, let's bring down 3D Paint 01. And let's bring it out here a little bit where we can see our textures. And we're going to move this all the way to the end. Okay, and now let's make a duplicate of this. Control D, we'll slide it out here. And let's make another duplicate, Control D, and slide it out to here. Now let's just back up here actually and make sure that these two should be about 1 second 12 frames is where this one should be. So left bracket, and let's just scrub through here. So where one ends, another one's going to pick up. So we can just kind of do that long tedious task of setting up the one comp one time and then kind of reuse it. And then at around 3 seconds, we should be able to have this texture come in, left bracket. Oh, we have to turn on the visibility. That's always helpful. Okay, maybe I'm going to go Alt Page Up to move it 1 frame forward. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So if we zoom out here, now we can see we have one very large comp to using Cinema 4D, just kind of reusing the same texture. Now we want a couple of variations of this texture. We don't want the exact same texture being used in Cinema 4D, and it'll be more apparent once we get over there. So let's make a duplicate of this but change it up just a little bit. So with the 3D Paint 01 selected in the project panel, Control D to duplicate it. So now we have 3D Paint 02. Let's double click that. And we're going to go ahead and select all of our splatter images. I'm going to do Alt Home to kind of reset those. And is what our goal is going to be is instead of going from left to right, now we're going to animate these on going from right to left. So we have these selected. Let's just double check that we select from the bottom to the top. Let's go back over to our script. We want PT Shift Layers. We want to shift, or actually we want to stagger the selected layers from current time marker. So let's bring that to the beginning of the comp and let's shift that by about 2 frames. Apply. And so now we have pretty much the same thing we had before, but now our textures are going to be used from the bottom to the top. The other thing that we want to do as well on this paint overlay, actually on the paint stroke, because that's our mask, we want to, let's come out here where this whole thing's on. Let's turn off the keyframe for end, and we're going to keyframe the start now. Okay, so that this goes from the right to the left. Okay, and we did that in about 1 second 12 frames. So let's come over here to the beginning and put this start at 100%, set a keyframe, 1 frame 12 seconds, and let's take this down to 0. Okay, so right now it's going, let me pull out just a little bit. So you can see we have it going from the right to the left. Now I'm just going to go back through here real quick, and I'm going to line up these textures a little bit more so that you know, they are matching the paint stroke a little bit better. So just like before, I'm going to speed up through this part so you don't have to watch me do that part again. Okay, just like before, I went through and I moved the splatter images to match the animation of the stroke coming on, and you can see it lines up pretty well. Okay, exact same process, but now we're just going from the right to the left. Now we want to be able to flip this comp, so let's go ahead and do Control A, select everything. We're going to do Control Shift C because we're going to pre-compose this. So let's call this 3D Paint 02 pre. Say OK. And with the scale here, S for scale, let's uncheck the link and let's make this -100. And so now we have our texture going from left to right. So it's going the same direction as the other one, but if we take a look here, it does not look exactly the same, right? It's just flipped. So this is 3D Paint 01. So now we have 3D Paint 02. We're just kind of reusing that hard work we put in at the beginning. Now we need another comp because we need it a large comp, just like our 3D Paint 02, or I'm sorry, 01 final here. We need the same thing for this texture. So Control N. Let's call this 3D Paint Final 02. And just like before, it's 18,000 pixels wide, 600 tall, 24 frames per second, 30 seconds. Say OK. And we're going to bring our 3D Paint comp in. And let's move out to where we can see it. Move it down to the end. Let's duplicate this. So right around 1 second, 12 frames. The next one should be able to take off. I'm going to do left bracket, line it up. Let's move it over. Scrub through here just a little bit. Let's check where these two come together. Okay, that looks good. Let's come out here to almost 3 seconds, probably just 1 frame before. Control D, slide it over. Let's do left bracket, scrub through here. Okay, looks good. And I'll come out here to 20 seconds. I'm going to click N for the end of the comp, and let's do that on our 01 final here as well. Let's come out here to 20 seconds, N for the end of the comp, and let's go ahead and export these so we can take them over to Cinema 4D and use them as a texture. So let's do that right now. Let's go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue, and then let's do the same thing for our 3D Paint 02, File, Export, Add to Render Queue. In the render queue, I'm going to select TIFF sequence with alpha. Okay. And same for our 3D Paint 02. And let's just give it a home. And here in After Effects CC, it's going to put it in a subfolder, which is good. We will go with that. And let's just make sure this one's in the right spot. Save. All right, let's hit render. And when this is done, we'll be over in Cinema 4D. Okay, here in Cinema 4D, if we press Control D, we bring up the attributes panel, and we want to make sure frames per second is on 24. Also in the render settings, let's take a look here. I'm doing 1280 by 720, and I'm also making sure that the frame rate is 24 frames per second there as well. The first thing we need to do in here is create a path for our 3D Paint to go on. So I'm going to hit F5 to bring up our 4 views, and in this top view, I'm just going to create a path here with a spline. So we'll just kind of create something that goes through here. Now if I select the Move tool, we can come in here and kind of spread these things out vertically to make it a little bit more dynamic. So we're just kind of rough something else out in here. Okay, just so it kind of loops through here. I'm going to hit F1 and see what we have here. Okay, so our paint will start over here on the right hand side, come loop through and out. So that's pretty good. Let's just go with that. And let's call this spline, I'm going to call this spline 01. Now let's create a surface for our texture. So we're going to create a plane. Okay, and let's change the orientation to the -Z. And we're going to change the width. We're going to kind of guess here and then we can make adjustments as we go. It needs to be fairly large. We're going to go 1800 by 80. Okay, and if I zoom out here, this is the surface that we're going to map that texture onto. Okay, we want this plane to follow the shape of our spline. So we're going to do that by going to the spline wrap. Okay, and we're going to drop that as a child on the plane. And on spline wrap, it's going to ask for what spline do we want it to fit. And we want spline 01. Drop that in there, and we get this kind of roughed in shape here. So on the plane, let's go ahead and increase the width segments. And you just want to increase it. You know, I try and keep it as low as possible, but we want this shape to be fairly smooth. We can also go into the spline itself and maybe change this to natural, and we can increase the number of points there as well. Okay, another thing you can do is to make it look like it's not just a flat plane being conformed here, we can go into the spline wrap, and for the rotation we can make adjustments to the banking. Okay, so you can obviously make adjustments there. You can also make adjustments along the spline, so we can have it banked at different values here. That looks pretty good. You just got to kind of find something that works for you. It'll be a little bit easier to see what you do and don't like once we get the texture on here. Okay, so a control click will add another point. And I don't want to make it too loopy here. There we go, I like that. And I'm actually going to hit F5 here, and I want to make an adjustment on this spline here. This point right here I want to move up just a little bit. Let's turn that back on. Okay, so this is our first path for our texture. So let's actually make our first texture. Down here I'm going to double click and create a texture. I'll double click to open the material editor, and I'm going to turn off the color. We want to work with the luminance channel. So I'll select that. I'm going to click the three dots here to load our texture. And let's go into our renders. So I'm just going with our first paint texture. Select the first one, say open, no, and I'm going to click on the texture right here and go into animation, and it's already at 24 frames per second. I'm going to click calculate. So it's going to start at frame 0 and go to frame 479. That's good. I'm going to go down here to specular. I'm going to turn that off. We want to add the alpha channel right from our render so that we don't see the entire plane. So let's click on alpha channel, and if I go down here to bitmaps, I can load the one that we've already loaded in the luminance channel. Let's click on the icon again. We were going to click calculate. Perfect. And in the editor tab, we want to click on animate preview so that we can actually see this in the editor here. And we're going to come back to this. Let's just apply this to see what we have. So I'm going to apply this to our plane. I'm going to hit F1. I hit F8 to play it. And as you can see here, we have our stroke coming on here. And let's expand this preview range. Let's come out to just 300 for now. So this is a really large texture, and it's hard to see it in real time come on here, but I'll stop it. Let's do a Control R to render it. And you can see that we have our paint texture going in 3D space, and it's looking pretty good. We could probably expand it a little bit more, make it a little bit taller. So into the plane, I'm actually going to make the height just a little bit more. Okay, let's hit Control R to see what we got. And that's looking pretty good. I'm looking at the aspect ratio of these splatters to just see if we need to lengthen the texture or shrink it. We can do that if we click on the texture here. We can turn off tile, and so instead of just enlarging the plane, we can also enlarge the texture itself. So if we come in here, so that's making it longer. Let's click on this one, maybe offset a little bit so it's more in the center. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Maybe just a little bit too big. Okay, so we don't need to adjust it too much. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Control R. Okay, so let's work on colorizing this because we don't want it to be just white. I think it looks a lot better in color. So I'm going to go back to our texture, and while I'm here, let me go ahead and name this. Let's just call this number 01A. Enter. Let's double click it to open it, and in the luminance we're going to go ahead and change the texture to, we want layer. Okay, and so now we can add other layers on top of this. If we click this icon here, we're going to add a shader. So we're going to add a gradient. So if we click on the gradient, we want 2D V. Okay, and this is where we're going to pick our color. So here, the center color, I'm going to make it a, let's go with an orange. I'm going to make it a dark orange. Okay, on the end here, I'm going to make it a little bit lighter orange. I'm going to hold down Control and drag to copy that. Oh, slid it too far. Maybe, let's try it a third time. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. We're going to turn the turbulence up. This is going to kind of help give it more of a splattery paint look. Okay, and obviously you can, play with these, kind of make it your own here. Let's try that. And the other thing, well, let's take a look at what this looks like now. So if we do Control R, this looks pretty good. And you can see we have a problem with the alpha channel not being quite big enough for, or this texture is not centered in here. So we need to fix that problem. But this looks pretty good. Okay, it gives us kind of a nice painterly effect. It's not really even, so that's what something we're looking for. Let's go back and fix this texture really quick because it's not quite centered on there, and so we're getting a weird line. There we go. Okay, that looks good. Now, one other effect that I found that really helps kind of sell this is if we go back into the texture and if we do a little bit of a displacement. So on the displacement for texture, we're going to go to noise. And on the noise, if we click on the noise, I've been experimenting with this one right here. This is Booyah. And on the displacement, let's maybe just bring it down to 3 centimeters and enable sub-polygon displacement. Now let's take a look at what that looks like. So it's kind of hard to see right here, but when we get closer, it is displacing this into 3D space, and it's just giving it a little bit more of a 3D feel, even though we're in 3D space. Since it's on a flat plane, we're trying to kind of give it as much 3D geometry as possible. Now, one thing that I found is when I get in here in some places, since it is on a plane, sometimes you get where you're just seeing the edge of the plane and it doesn't really look as good as it could. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to make a duplicate of this path here, and we're going to offset it a little bit. So let's go ahead and put all this into a null. So we'll just hit Alt G, and let's call this 01A. I'm going to hold down Control, drag down, and I'm going to name this 01B. And we're going to take this spline, let me hit F5, and from the top we're going to go into the object mode, and we're going to offset this just a little bit. Okay, let's take a look. So I just want it so it's fairly similar path, but just not exactly the same path. We want them running right next to each other. So this is where our second texture comes into play. Having two splines running right next to each other with the exact same texture on it doesn't look very well because you have textures lining up with one another. So down here on 01A, let's hold down Control and drag over. Let's name this 01B. And we want to keep everything the same except we want to use that other texture that we made in After Effects. So in Luminance, we're going to go to the layer. We want bitmap. We want to click on that. And we're going to go in here and we're going to select our second texture. Click Open. No. Go to Animation. Calculate. Okay. And let's go down to Alpha Channel and replace that one as well. So we can come down here into bitmaps and we want the 3D Final Paint 02. Click on the icon, animate, let's recalculate that. And we need to replace this texture here, so we're going to click and drag that on. Now we have two splines running right along one another, but each spline has a different texture. Let's do Control R, take a look. Okay, and that's making it look, a little bit better already. Now one other thing I like to do on the second plane is if we go into the spline wrap, we're going to change the rotation of it so that these planes are intersecting each other, and when one plane we kind of see its edge, we see the face of the other one. Okay, so let's just change the banking a little bit. Okay, so you can see that now we're seeing the plane a little bit more straight on here, and then it helps out in the corners as well. So let me hit Control R. And I think that's really helping sell the look of 3D Paint a lot more, having those two planes. And you could use more planes. I just went with the two, but feel free to add as many as you see fit. Okay, let's go ahead and add in just a little camera move for this first part. So I'm gonna hit F5 and let's add a camera to our scene. Let's activate it. And let's start here at the beginning. So this can get a little slow with these large textures here, so you just have to be a little bit patient. So let's move the camera in here for the start. So I know it's going to start down here. We won't do anything too dramatic here. So let's go into coordinates. Let's go ahead and set a keyframe. Holding down Control, clicking the dots. So I'm just going to set them all for the position and for the rotation, just so that I'm not sure exactly how we're going to move the camera through here. So let's scrub through here, and like I said, we'll have to kind of wait and see where this texture is at different points. So let's come over here, out. Let's bring it down. And we don't have to get real crazy with the camera move here because this thing is kind of animating along these loops and stuff. We have a lot of motion with this paint. And then let's go ahead and have a secondary paint stroke come through. So maybe we'll have one come up here in front of the camera and then we want to turn around and come in towards the camera so we can do that end splatter. So we need to duplicate our textures down here because we're going to do different colors. So I'm going to hold down Control and drag over the 1A. So I'm going to name this 02A, hit enter, and I'm going to double click it. We're going to go into the luminance, and I'm going to change the color of the gradient. So maybe let's do a blue. Okay. Come on. All right, maybe just make some adjustments here. That looks good. I'm going to right click and do copy. And now with 01B, I'm going to hold down Control and drag over. Double click, we have 02B. And I will double click that one. Let's go into the gradient as well. And I'm just going to select it and click paste so that we have the same gradient from 02A. Go ahead and close that. And we need to duplicate 01A here. So I'm going to click it, Control drag down, double click 02A. Now we have our spline in here that it's following, so right now it's going to go along the same path. So I'm going to hold down Alt and actually click twice to make those red to turn those off. And we need to bring a new spline in here. So I hit F5. And let's go ahead and draw in a spline. Let's start here. So this can be just a little tricky trying to, get your splines to kind of intersect with the other ones. So I want it to come, so I'm looking over here. I want it to come out from the bottom down here, maybe a little more forward. Let's scoot this over. Let's actually have this go back behind this one. So we have to kind of travel back through there. So just a lot of fiddling around here. It looks like it kind of intersects right there. Let's take a look here. So I'm just looking. We have intersecting right here, so I'm going to bring that down. And let's bring this down. Maybe so it goes through that one. Let's bring this one up. Okay, that looks pretty good. So with our new spline here, we have spline. I call this 02, and I'm going to drop it down here, get rid of spline 1. So on our spline wrap, I'm going to drop in spline 02, and then I'm also going to add our new texture. Okay, let's hold down Alt and click the 2 dots here to turn that on, and we can see our new path is going to come through here. Let's do a Control R just to see what this looks like. Okay, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to change the rotation a bit. And on the spline, okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and do Control drag down to duplicate that. Let's call this 0 to B. And we're going to, again, take the spline. Let's go F5. And I'm going to offset the spline just a little bit. Not too much. Okay, that's good. And let's go ahead and change the banking just a little bit. And we're going to replace the texture 0 to B to F1. Let's do a quick preview. Okay, one problem we're going to run into is that all four of these textures start at frame 0. They start playing at frame 0. So we want the textures, these blue textures, to start after we get to this point in our animation. Okay, so let's take a look at, let's go back to the camera, and right around here is where we want the blue one to actually start. Let's start the blue at 90 frames and see kind of how that does for us. So I'm actually going to turn off 0 to B, and we'll just work with 0 to A. So 0 to A, if we, for the luminance, let's go into the bitmap, go to animation, and we want to change this to range. And we want this to start at 90. Okay, and for the end, we are going to do, there's 479 frames, so I'm going to do 479 plus the 90, since that's what we're starting off. And we can hit enter. And so it's going to start at frame 90 and end at 569, even though we won't go all the way out there. Okay. And then we need to do the same thing with our alpha channel. So we'll go into animation. We want to change this to range. We want it to start at 90. And we're going to do 90 plus the 479. Okay, so that our alpha channel and our luminance channel match up. Let's close that, and let's just step through here really quick. Okay, so here it comes on right here, and it could probably come on a little bit sooner. Okay, let's go with 80. So go back to the alpha channel, click here, animation, range, we want 80. And so here we're going to do 80 plus the 479. Let's go back to luminance, do the same thing. 80 plus the 479. Perfect. Let's do that for 0 to B now that we know what we want as far as timing. Animation, go to range, put in 80 plus the 479. Perfect. Let's go over to alpha. Same thing. 80. Then we have 80 plus the 479. Okay, and now we have this timing a little bit better so that we can start moving the camera and we won't see that we're not quite making it to the end on this orange one. And let's go back to our camera and let's finish animating the camera here. Okay, so after enough fiddling around here with this, we have something that'll work here. So at the end of our animation right here at 185, okay, so I'm going to change this to 185. Our spline comes and then it comes, makes a loop and comes towards the camera, so we can do our end splatter right there. Now, one thing about this look in Cinema 4D is that, let me get to where we can see more of our splines, is that obviously we have, these paint strokes that are two-dimensional and they're being put onto a 2D plane, and then we're kind of faking this 3D look. So in order to give it more depth, we're going to actually export this whole scene, so the animation and the cameras and everything, back to After Effects, and we're going to actually add more textures to this in After Effects. So a great way to do that, to make it easy, is we want some nulls that are going to be along these splines so that we kind of know some general reference points once we're into After Effects. So to do that, I'm going to create a null, and I'm going to go to MoGraph, Cloner, and I'm going to clone the null. And I want to clone the null along this first spline. So in the cloner, I'm going to go to Object, and I'm going to select Object for the mode. And we're going to clone along this first spline. Okay, and right now it's on count. So let me come out here. And you can kind of see it if I turn off the plane. You can see these dots in here, okay, that represent these nulls in here. So I'm just going to give myself, I'm just going to put in 12. So I'm going to have 12 nulls along this spline right here, so that when I go over to After Effects, I'll have 12 reference points along this first spline. Okay, and I'm going to right click this, and I'm going to do Cinema 4D tags, and I'm going to do external compositing because I want those the positions of those nulls in After Effects. Okay, so let's actually call this Cloner 01. So that's for our first spline, and then we want some clones around this second set of splines as well. So I'm going to do Control and drag down, and I don't want it to be a child of that one. Let's put it above it. So with this one, I'm going to call this Cloner 02. Okay, and for the object, I want it to be on this second spline. And so now I can see these dots along this second set of splines, and we will leave the count as 12 as well. Okay. So this is looking pretty good. We have clones along our splines that we're going to use in After Effects. We have 4 planes. Okay, these 2 planes are a pair for the orange, and then we have these 2 planes down here as a pair for the blue. Let's turn those on. So the trickiest part is getting the timing down, but once you got it, it goes pretty fast. Let's go into the render settings and take a look at what we're going to use as far as render settings. Now in our project, we went out here to 185 frames, so I'm going to change this to 185. And I'm going to export this as a TIFF sequence. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a home. Let's just call this 3D Paint. And we want definitely an alpha channel for this. Compositing project file, we want to save that for After Effects. We want to include 3D data because that's where the nulls along the splines, that's where that data is going to come from. Multipass, we don't need. Anti-aliasing, I'm going to leave it on just geometry, and we can put this on Gauss animation. And I think everything else looks pretty good. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit render, and then we're going to take this back to After Effects and just add a few more paint textures to this to really sell this 3D look. Okay, we are back in After Effects. Let's go ahead and import our render from Cinema 4D. With the project panel selected, I'm going to use Control I. and we want to import the AEC file that was generated by Cinema 4D. Okay, so if I select it and click import, that's going to bring in our render with all the assets that we need to go with it. In this 3D Paint folder, we have a comp called 3D Paint. We'll double click that. And if I scrub through here, we can see our render from Cinema 4D. And we also have all those null layers that we added along the spline. Okay, looks good. Let's first take a look at what we're going to do with these null layers. They're there so that we can add additional paint splatters to the scene. Now, obviously we used a lot of paint splatters to create it, but those paint splatters are all oriented along the path. We want to add a few more in here just to give it a little bit more of a 3D feel. So right here on this orange paint coming through, right here in the corner, as it makes the corner, you can kind of tell that it's on a plane, right? And so we have a null right here in the corner, and we're going to go ahead and use that to position another splatter. So if I select the null, we can see that's null number 8 down here. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that. And all the other nulls, I'm going to go ahead and shy those for right now, and I'm going to turn off the visibility too, just to get them out of the way so we can see what's going on a little bit better here. So let's go ahead and shy all these. And so I'll select the shy button, and now we just have our render from Cinema 4D as a TIFF sequence. We have our null right here in the corner, and we have our camera for the comp. So let's go ahead and change this a little bit. Let's make this maybe just a quarter for right now. And let's jump over and grab one of our paint splatters that we can apply to this corner here. In Bridge, we can just grab another one of our splatters here. I'm going to grab Splatter 04, and let's bring that into After Effects. And let's bring that down into our comp. Let's go ahead and apply the effect. We want the null unmult again so that it is transparent. And we want to position this in 3D space, so I will click the 3D icon here. And obviously it kind of gets lost in the comp just because if I click P, its position is nowhere where we want it. We want it right here where this null is, so let's go ahead and select the null. Let me unlock it, hit P, and there are keyframes set even though if we look in the comp here, it's not actually moving during the duration. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and turn that off, and I'm going to select position, Control C to copy, and I'm going to go up to my splatter, Control V to position that, and now our splatter is in the position of the null. Now it's just a little bit too big. Let's press S, and let's scale that down. Let's take a look here. Now we have a couple choices to make here. We can have this splatter be in front of the paint or behind it. And sometimes it just depends on where the stroke is, what it's doing. But let's see what this looks like behind it. Okay, and that doesn't look too bad. We can offset this just a little bit. And let's scrub through here. We don't want this splatter to come on until the stroke is right in the corner here. So maybe right there. I want it to come on. So I'm going to hit left bracket. And so this will just pop on right when it hits that corner. Okay, just to add a little bit of dynamics to this. So let's go ahead and colorize this. So in the effects here, I'm going to go for the gradient ramp. So let's apply that to our splatter. I'm going to change this to a radial ramp. And let's make the start of the ramp right in the center here. And then we have the end of the ramp here. So for the start color, I'm going to make it something kind of dark orange. So I'm going to sample it from here. And then the end, let's go ahead and make it kind of a brighter orange. Just kind of match our scene a little bit. And let's move that in here. Okay, so as this thing moves through, right when it hits that corner, it's going to move through there. And since this splatter is oriented towards the camera, really adds to that parallax feeling there. Now one other thing I want to do is I do want to add a splatter right on the front just to blend these two together a little bit better. So let's jump back over to bridge, and I want an image maybe like this one that has, you know, just not really a centralized location, just kind of more spread out. So let's bring that into After Effects. So this is splatter 03. Now let's do this to save a little bit of time on the splatter 04. Control D to duplicate it, and then we hold down Alt and bring splatter 3 down. So we're just replacing the footage. Okay, all the effects are still applied. Now with this one, I'm going to bring this one above our render out of Cinema 4D. Okay, so now those splatters are over the top of it, and you can see them there. And I'm just going to kind of move them into this position. Let's maybe scale it down just a little bit. Okay, so as we move around, boom, right there in the corner. And you can see as I scrub through here, we get a nice parallax effect. And obviously you can add this throughout the path as it goes around, and it really adds to it. Just a little bit here and there really makes it more believable that it's 3D paint. Okay, let's now take a look at that splatter that's right at the end of the comp to reveal our logo. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to unshy the layers, and I'm going to turn these nulls back on. And actually, I'm going to turn these first nulls off because they are related to this first spline, and I want the secondary group of nulls to be turned on. I think it's actually null 11 here, the last one. Let's scrub through here and take a look. And again, adding those splatters right here, you know, in the corners is a great place to add the splatters. But yeah, right there, right when it hits there, we want our end splatter there to reveal our logo. So for the logo reveal, let me jump over to bridge. I'm going to use this paint splatter here. I'm using the Riot Gear animated textures this time, because obviously this animates kind of being splatted on, and it comes on nice and quick to reveal our logo. So let's bring that paint 07 in. Okay, so there it is. And we want to apply the same effects that we did to these other splatters. So I'm just going to select our splatter 03, Control D to duplicate it, and I'm going to bring it in by holding down Alt to replace it. And with the position, we want to copy the position from our null 11 here. So I'm going to turn off the stopwatch, Control C to copy the position, select it for our video file, Control V to paste it in there. And obviously we want to slide this down the timeline here so it doesn't appear until we get right to that end. Okay, right there. And let's look at the scale. It's very small. Okay, it's still a little bit too small. Let's scale it up. Let's go ahead and rotate this. So it's important that's in 3D space because the camera's still moving right here. And so we want to make sure that our texture is moving with it. So right when it hits there, okay, and it's off just a little bit because this stroke is still going. So let's just move our paint splatter to hide that. Okay, let's check the scale again. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, good. Now obviously we want this to be blue. So let's go over to our effects. Let's make the start a dark blue. And let's set the end to be a bright blue. And let's move these. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to go Control K. I wanted to add to our duration here because I'm getting a little close to the end. Let's just make this 20 seconds just to give me plenty of room. Let's pull this out. On our camera, we want to make sure that goes all the way to the end of our comp. And with our 3D paint here, I'm going to do Control Alt T to time remap it just so that we can extend it to the end as well. Okay, otherwise that's going to disappear on us. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shy those nulls again. So let's scrub through here and see how this looks. Okay, let's go ahead and bring in our logo. So here we just have a PNG file. Let's go ahead and import that into After Effects. Now with this PNG file, we want it to line up with our paint video file here in 3D space. So I'm going to click the paint, Control D to duplicate, and this lower one here I'm going to replace by holding down Alt and drag it on top. Now I only did that because I wanted the position. In the effects control, we don't need unmult. It already has a alpha channel, and I don't want a gradient applied to it either. Let me move it up here into position, and we want to scale this down. Okay, and I actually want this on top of the paint so that we can see it. And we rotated our paint, so this is off just a little bit. So W for rotation, and I'm actually just going to rotate it down here. Let's change this back to 0. Okay, so there's our logo. Now we want to use the paint as a matte to reveal our logo on. Okay, so I'm gonna duplicate the paint, Control D. I'm gonna move the duplicate above the logo. I'm gonna hit F4 on the keyboard, and on our logo here, I'm gonna make the track matte let's go with the alpha matte. So as this paint comes on, let's see if I can scrub through here. Right there, as that comes on, it's going to reveal our logo in there. Now in the preview, we also have paint that looks like it's hitting really close to the lens. It's out of focus. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we get that effect added to this as well. So here in Bridge, let's just find a splatter that again is just kind of spread throughout, not real centralized splatter. Something like this will work out pretty well. Let's go ahead and bring that into After Effects. So we have this splatter 14. We want it in the same location as our video file here. So with Paint 07, the movie selected, I'm going to duplicate it, Control D. And let's go ahead and Alt drag that texture in there, and we can see it right in here. I'm going to actually put it on top of our logo. And let's scale this down. And I don't want to change let's move it up. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's apply the fast blur. Okay, let's go ahead and blur this out, just so it looks like it's closer to the camera when it hits. So if we scrub through here, it hits, and that looks pretty good. And we can actually, let's jump over to Bridge, and let's go to the paint splatter. And let's actually use a video file to make it look like it's kind of dripping on the camera. Let's see what this one looks like here. Okay, that's not bad. For the sake of time, we'll just go ahead and use this one. Let's bring that into After Effects. Okay, let's go ahead and duplicate splatter 14, Control D, and I'm just going to Alt drag it on top. Okay, and let's rotate this, and we want it on the Z axis. Let's go ahead and scale this up. Alright, so when this thing comes in, it's going to hit, and then we have debris that looks like it's closer to the lens. And we might even just offset these just a little bit so that they hit afterwards. Okay, the only other thing we need to do here is add a background image to this, just kind of give it a little bit more depth. So over here in Bridge, I have some psychedelic paper. Looks like we've had ink on it. Let's go ahead and use that as a background image. So let's bring that into After Effects. And we want to just drop it into our comp. Let's actually put it all the way at the bottom. Let's go ahead and make this a 3D layer. Okay, and it's a little bit big. So let's scale this down. And we're going to have to kind of play with it a little bit to make sure we're lined up. So let's zoom out here. Let's see where it kind of... So this is... So let's rotate it. And we are going to... Let's look at the position. Let's send it back in here. Let's scrub through here to make sure that we don't see the edges. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and apply the fast blur just so it's not super in focus. Looks like it's, you know, away from the camera a little bit. And let's look at let's take the exposure down on it just so it doesn't stand out quite so much. And now if we scrub through here, yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, and we can do other things to the actual render from Cinema 4D as well. This one here. So if it's not quite saturated enough, we can, you know, apply curves to it. So let's maybe make it more contrasty. Okay, maybe you want to change the saturation of it. Maybe it's not saturated enough. Maybe it's too saturated, right? So you can always make changes there as well. And the last thing that we have is in the preview, I have the little tagline coming on, and let's take a look at how we make that part. So in Bridge here, we are going to use the Riot Gear ink bleeds, and let's just use Reveal 05. Let's bring that into After Effects. And let's also bring in our secondary logo that goes in below our main logo here. So let's go ahead and bring that into After Effects. And we're just going to drop it in. We're not going to make this a 3D layer. This will just be 2D because it's going to come in after we get to our final resting place right here. And actually want it below the paint though. Let's go ahead and scale this down. That looks good right there. And maybe let's go ahead and change the color. Let's do a fill. And let's make it a bluish color, but maybe something like that. Let's go ahead and take our reveal, put it right above it. And let's bring it out here to where we want it to come on. Let's hit F4. On our logo here, we're going to make this the Luma. And as we scrub through here, we can have this wipe on. Okay. So there you have it. That's the basic technique for getting 3D paint stroke using After Effects and Cinema 4D and back to After Effects. Okay. And the real key with this project is every little bit along the way really helps to sell the effect. Okay, making the texture, making it as seamless as possible, and then taking it into Cinema 4D and really working out the paths to look as natural as possible, work out those timings, bring them back into After Effects, and adding these additional splatters. Okay, I only added a couple right here, but if you add them along the way, it really helps to sell this look quite a bit. Okay, I hope this project was fun for you. I'd love to see what you make. So as always, if you make something fun with it that you want to share, shoot me a link. I'd love to see it. Thanks for watching.